Hey everybody, thanks so much for watching again. Heard last week was really great with Dominic being the communicator last week, wrapping up our Chaos series. Really wish I could have been there, but I heard great things and good discussions in small groups. All that stuff happened. So I'm really proud of our leadership team. I had a great time traveling with family, but it is good to be back this week. So looking forward to jumping back into a brand new series called Wired. But before we get there, I want to talk about some of our leadership style stuff and things for small group leaders as we're kicking back into the school year. We talked about it last Sunday night, but not all of you were there. But I want to encourage you, as our numbers are beginning to increase this school year, as students are coming back from vacations, getting back in the routine of coming to school every day and coming to youth group on Sundays and Wednesdays and that kind of stuff. As routines are kicking back in, we'll see our numbers start to grow a little bit. And with that, I encourage you to split your group for small group time a little bit smaller to get into some smaller discussion groups for the curriculum kind of thing. So I encourage you to think like 7 to 12 people in a group is really optimal. Any more than 12, and you get some people that feel like they can't share, any less than 7 feels like the group's too small. So shoot for like 7 to 12 students in your smaller discussion groups as part of your small group time. And I really encourage you to go right from our talk time into small groups and into those smaller discussion groups right away. So get into your room together, split up into those discussion groups and dive into the topic. And then at the end of small group time, use that to come back together, do prayer requests together, have some social time, talk about highs and lows, that sort of thing as a large group if you want, or you can stay in their smaller discussion groups for that. But I encourage you to dive right into the topic straight from the talk time into small groups so we keep that train of thought going instead of splitting that train of thought up halfway through and going into your small groups, doing some social stuff, then getting into the discussion. It's a little bit harder for students to transition because then you're bouncing back and forth between curriculum, hanging out, curriculum again. So again, I encourage you, split into those smaller groups straight from talk time. It'll give us a great transition into small groups. I think you'll find some deeper conversations, some stronger conversations from students and that sort of thing. If you need another small group box or if you need more supplies, let me know. I'd be happy to do that if you're splitting your group into smaller discussion groups. And it'll just give us some depth. It'll give us a chance to dive deeper with our students in these smaller discussion groups. So let me know if you have questions, if I can help with that. I think we'll find some great success with that. So as we're kicking off this new series called Wired, we're starting off with this idea of there's no wires to things. And so it got me thinking, well, for me, internet is a little bit like that. Like I know how the internet works, but when I think about, okay, if I sit on my phone in the middle of wherever, I can hop on Amazon, order something, and almost instantly it tells somebody at an Amazon facility that I ordered something, they put it in a box, and 2 days later, the thing I pressed on my phone arrives at my doorstep. It's like magic. There's no wires. There's nothing that connects me to that person at Amazon. There's nothing that connects us with our faces or our pictures. But internet happens, and we know that it happens because we have evidential proof of that. Now, maybe God feels like that to you sometimes. God might seem like he's a little bit magic for our students. You come to church, you hear people talk about how great God is, how much God loves you, how God made you. We talk about all their relationships with him as if it's the most normal thing in the world, but there's one problem that nobody seems to mention. You can't see God. And maybe it's something different for you. Maybe you've tried praying and it was weird because you asked a question and heard nothing back. You hear people talking about their great relationship with God. Some people even say he spoke to them, but how does that work when you can't actually hear God's voice? So see, it's easy to believe in the internet when we don't see it. Why? Because we see evidence. We get the music downloads, we hear the sounds, but when it comes to God, we're not getting physical messages or files of music from him on our phones. So the whole idea of God is a little bit harder to wrap our heads around, even though it's the same kind of wireless feel like internet. How are you supposed to know someone you can't see? How are you supposed to have a conversation with someone who doesn't talk back? Why does this whole God thing seem to work for other people? Now, if we're honest, even though we have those questions, most of the time, we just don't think about it. It's like me and Wi-Fi. As long as it's working, it's okay. It doesn't bother me that I don't understand it. But when things don't work out how we want, the questions start to matter more. And it's in those moments, there's something in us that wants to know that the world around us isn't just random, that somehow it's wired and we're wired to work in a certain way, that somebody or something has our back. Now we're going to look all the way back to the book of Genesis this week, in the first book of the Bible, to see what it says about God's relationship with his people. It'll sound very familiar to week 1 of our Continuum series in the summertime. So the very first words in the Bible say this: in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and it all begins with creation. Now, God's making a point here and letting us know that it wasn't by accident. It just didn't happen by itself. He intentionally wired the earth to function. It's not random, but the writer of Genesis goes on to say something even more interesting than that. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. Not only did God wire the universe to function in certain ways, but he also wired humanity. God created us intentionally to function and interact with the earth, but he also created us different than anything else. He created us in his own image. If God created us in his image, that means we're part of him. We're hardwired to God as a part of us. There are things about him reflected in us. So maybe you've noticed it, or maybe you've never noticed it, or maybe you have, but you just don't know what to call it. But we see evidence of this all the time. I want you to think to the last time you saw something amazing in nature. Maybe it was a trip to the beach. Maybe you went camping in the mountains. Maybe it was a sunset at the beach or a powerful thunderstorm. Whatever it was for you, you still remember it. And there's something about nature, especially the parts of it that only God could create, that moves us. It makes us feel something. It doesn't matter if you're a Christian or not. It doesn't matter how often you go to church or whatever. This happens to all of us. And when it does, it's the image of God working inside of you. And just like God looked at each thing he created and saw it was good, that part of him and you looks at the most amazing things in nature, and it still tells you this is good. And the image of God is everywhere we can imagine. And it's more than just nature. We've felt something move inside of us when we've seen a lot of different things. A firefighter rescue someone in danger, people who run out to the site of a tragedy to help others. We see those YouTube videos about classmates or teammates who rally around someone they know to make them feel awesome. Or we've seen movies like Unbroken that show forgiveness that seems impossible. Now, it's not random that the movies and stories that make us feel the most and stick with us the longest are also the ones that display the characteristics of God in the clearest way. Things like kindness and forgiveness and sacrificing oneself to care for others, those are the characteristics of God, and they're the things that we notice in other people. See, the image of God is everywhere we can imagine. Now, the truth about my phone or my iPad or every device that I own is nothing is really wireless. There's a wire somewhere on a modem inside your phone in a server that transmits a signal to something else that's wired the same way. It seems like magic, but there's a wire somewhere. The same is true for God and us. When we don't see God or the evidence of the way he wired us in the world, it can seem unbelievable, crazy even. But when we begin to see the evidence of his wiring, it becomes a little less invisible to us. Now, this is great news, but what are you supposed to do with that? Well, let's fast forward a little bit in Scripture, and we'll read a verse from Deuteronomy. It says, "Hear, O Israel," basically, hear, people of God, "the Lord your God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength." That's Deuteronomy 6, 4 through 5. Now, Moses is telling the people of Israel, the people who had been raised in hearing the stories of creation of Adam and Eve, of God's imprint and image being on each and every person, that the most important thing for us to do is to love God. Just love him. And that sounds crazy because we can't see him, but God said to do this because we're wired to. The image of God is inside of us. We are made in the image of God, each and every one of us. Look for evidence of God, and when you see it, acknowledge God, thank God, appreciate him. That alone is loving him. So in the next couple of weeks, we're going to talk about different ways to do this, but it starts with this. It starts with look for God. Let the image of God in you look for the image of God everywhere else. The image of God is everywhere we can imagine. Now, nearly every love story begins with two people who finally notice each other. Think about your favorite romance movie or your favorite story about two people falling in love. In fact, the opposite is also true. It's really hard for people to love each other if they never stop to notice each other to begin with, if they never pay attention. So notice God. Pay attention, even if it's just for this week, to the places where God's wiring is obvious in the world. And I think you will find the more you notice God, the easier it will be to love him. As you head out today and as our students head out this week, I want you to think about the one place where you see the evidence of God's wiring. Maybe it's in nature, maybe it's in others, maybe it's in yourself. No matter where you find God, pay attention and use that moment to move closer to God. I think you'll discover that even when you can't see God, you're able to notice God's wiring in more places than you ever imagined. So that's what we're talking about this week, that we are wired and God is hardwired in us because we are made in the image of God. Our world is made in the image of God. It's a beautiful creation, and we can notice God's wiring in the world around us in just about any place that we're at if we're looking hard enough. So thank you so much for watching. We'll see you this Sunday for our leader meeting at 4:45 here at the Anona campus. Out at 360 United campus, Omar will meet with you guys and pray a little bit beforehand. Get ready for youth group. And our prayer for you is that God uses you as leaders to impact and change the lives of these students. And a great message to share is that they are made in the image of God and that God is wired in more places than they could ever imagine. Have a great week, guys. We'll see you later.